7 minutes of material in me. You've saved me. But yeah, Karen. So as I was saying, it's great to have you with us today. I think it'd be great to get a little bit of an introduction to you and your background and your interest in this topic.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. Well, first, Clark, thank you for having me. I'm really, if you haven't checked out Clark's company, Novela, or his online simulations, you're in for a treat. So definitely check those out. So I'm Karen Mahon. I am the head of the learning design team at Emeritus. And we are an organization that partners with elite institutions around the world, MIT, Harvard, Wharton School, and we create online and blended executive education programs. And so it's really my good fortune to work with a company that is very mission oriented, and we want to provide high quality online accessible education around the world. And so a little bit about me. I am an educational psychologist by training and a behavior scientist. I've been doing this kind of work in instructional design, and we'll probably get into a little bit of my adaptive learning background as we talk about what AI can do now that we used to do by hand. And so I've been doing this kind of work for about 25 years. And I know I look extremely youthful, so you never would have guessed. But yeah, it's been a labor of love for me over time. I've done K-12, special ed, regular ed, higher ed, executive ed, obviously, corporate training, and mostly in the digital space. And so really excited to be here to talk with you all today about something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is learner feedback.
And you're pronouncing your surname Mahon. It's been, what, 6 or 7 years? And I
well,
had no idea.
So Clark is an Irishman. And so what I will tell you is that in Ireland, my name is pronounced Mahon. And but when my grandparents came here from Ireland, nobody knew how to say that. And so they sort of accepted the Americanized version. But when I'm in Ireland, I have to be very careful to pronounce it correctly.
Yes, I would have thought so. I've been pronouncing it what we would call the real way.
The correct way.
Yeah.
That's also perfectly fine.
So to get us started with today's topic, we've been chatting quite a bit recently, and that's why I thought it'd be great to bring this one to life with other educators about this notion of specifically immediate feedback. Now, easy question to get us started, but what is meant by immediate feedback, and how does it work in an online setting?
Well, immediate feedback is, very much what the name implies, that there is information given about the learner's performance as close in proximity to the responding as possible. And so why is that so important? It's important because I've just done something, and immediately I get feedback about what was good, what wasn't so good, what could I improve upon. And so it gives me the opportunity to utilize that feedback immediately. If feedback is very delayed, so say, we all probably can remember in grade school or even in college, submitting an assignment, and then some number of days or weeks later, we would get it back with red ink all over it. And the feedback is so delayed that it's difficult for the learner to incorporate that feedback for the next time. And so we really like to do it immediately. And I think that online in the digital space, particularly now with the way AI is growing, more than ever before, we have opportunities to make as much feedback as possible immediate, specific, and actionable for the learners.
Now, the feedback itself can come in many different shapes and sizes. So what are some of the types of feedback that we can we can get into, because I think even when we think about it ourselves, feedback as a general thing, it is good, but it can have greater or lesser impact, right? So what are some of the categories that we can think of there when we're thinking about applying it in online learning?
Well, I think I alluded to a couple of them just now. Beyond the immediacy, the specificity, and the informativeness. So, just giving feedback that says like, great job, does not provide information to the learner that is useful. If we say, great job adding single digits in math, then that is much more specific and gives me information then about what I did well. The same thing with corrective feedback. So if we just say, oh, not quite, try again, that isn't particularly helpful to the learner, because especially for more complex tasks, I don't necessarily know where I went wrong. And just continuing to try again can get increasingly frustrating. And so feedback that is specific about what it is that the learners did, whether that's good or bad or ugly, and then how do they move forward in a way to be successful the next time. Not giving the answer away, but giving them guidance about what to review perhaps in the previous materials, or what to look at in their response that was problematic. So I think those are really like the three legs: immediate, specific, and informative or actionable.
And then when you bring that into an online setting, what are some of the challenges with implementing that in your instance, in different courses, right? Are there different types of learning and different types of content where it is easier, harder, less impactful, more impactful than others?
Yes, definitely. So, it really depends. It really depends on the kind of activity, the kind of assignment. So, for example, if we are asking a learner to write something, and they have to submit that for a human being to look at it and then give feedback, then there's that delay, right? So the feedback that comes from the human grader may be specific, it may be informative, but it's not immediate. And perhaps the learners don't have another opportunity to try again and incorporate that feedback. So one of the things that we do that isn't, I'm not going to say it's a perfect solution. It's far from a perfect solution. But one of the things that we do is we include feedback in situations where we can't give immediate feedback to learners on their specific submissions. We include feedback of good examples of answers, and oftentimes some poor examples of answers, so that at least the learners can compare what they've produced to some samples and see what looks good and where they can make improvements. My headset is hollering at me to charge it, so I'm just plugging in.
Oh yeah, you've got a snazzy system there where you can do. I just have to unplug and then go and get another one and come back. So it's as high tech as it gets.
Well,
around here.
We'll see if it works. If I suddenly can't be heard or can't hear, then we'll know that it didn't.
Yeah, and I've used all my material, so it'd be dead air.
We've used your 7 minutes of material. But so that's something that we do, is the canned feedback to kind of bridge the gap. But I do think that one of the things that I'm so excited about with AI, and we're doing some experiments with it now, is the AI. We've already had solutions for automatic grading of things like multiple choice questions, right? Like those have existed for many, many years. And we've also had solutions for for adaptive learning paths, where in real time, a piece of software evaluates a learner response and decides where they need to go next. And we can give immediate and specific feedback. But that's super, super labor intensive. You have to lay out in advance every possible path that a learner might follow, and give the software the decision-making algorithms to determine where they should go. So it's a huge upfront investment in terms of both time and money. But now with the power of AI, we are experimenting with the ability of a tool like ChatGPT to evaluate a more complex learner response compared to a performance rubric. And so, this is a pretty sophisticated grading task that we're asking AI to help us with. And we know that it's fast, right? We know that it's much faster than a human being, but can we get to a point where we can provide the adequate training to the tool where it can be as good? And that is part of what we're investigating now. And it's for exactly the problem that you alluded to. There, for certain kinds of activities, there's often this big delay. And so that violates our number one premise of strong feedback.
Mm. And when you think about those 3 areas that make good feedback in this setting, how would you
setting, I would say any sort of education or training setting, those are the 3.
How would you then weight those? Because you are going to get the speed from AI, right? And you're looking into this at the moment. So as much as you can share on how that's working would be great. You're definitely going to get the speed from the AI, but does that make up for, potentially, if you were comparing it to human grading, the extra bit of specificity that you might get from a person? Or is there a way of thinking about that trade-off? Assuming that the AI feedback is not actually to the same level of quality, that would depend on the human obviously doing it, but as a general rule.
Well, I think it's a really important empirical question that you're asking, and I don't know the answer to it. So first, let me say that, of course, the most important thing with feedback is that it's accurate. And so, you could have fast feedback that is totally inaccurate, and that is not going to help anybody. So if we start from a place of assuming that the feedback that once the training is done, that the AI tool can, in fact, produce accurate feedback, then you're getting into a more nuanced question around the specificity, around the helpfulness of the information. I think we don't know the answer. I think there are studies that need to be done around that question. I guess I'll say my somewhat informed guess is that we could give up a little bit of specificity for speed, because on the flip side, if we have a long delay in the feedback, but it's very specific, very informative, but there's no opportunity to incorporate that feedback and try again, then it's unclear to what extent the learner can actually take that feedback on board and apply it.
And something we've discussed a little bit in relation to Novela, but it's certainly not unique to that, and something that we're thinking about quite a lot is, within an activity, is that I know the answer to that question, but how often should this feedback be given, I suppose, as a guiding mechanism? I know you mentioned a point that I was going to ask about, which is you don't want to give the answer, right? There's got to be something that nurtures the motivation of the learner. It's not just leading them straight to the answer, or even saying, have 2 attempts and then we'll just tell you the answer. Well, it doesn't really motivate them that much. But how do you go about thinking, and maybe AI is part of a solution here if applied correctly, about building in feedback along a learning journey rather than the more classic assessment of do the assignment, hand it in, maybe get immediate feedback, maybe it takes a week, 2 weeks, whatever, but the feedback comes at the end when you've done it.
Mm.
Are there ways of building in, I suppose, checkpoints along the way where it could let the learner know before they even get to that point?
Yeah, so that's a really important question. And I think that the way we need to think about that journey is, when we think about the final performance that summative evaluation usually takes place with, how can we break that up? So how can we chunk things up into smaller tasks, if you will? So some component skills that then combine into what we call a composite skill, which is multiple components. And how can we break up the steps of that learning journey so that skills are getting more, we're going from few to many and from simple to difficult? And how can we provide feedback every step of the way? More feedback is always better. Even if it's like, when you think about when you're a kid playing the hot and cold game. And so, you'd hide, one kid would hide something and another would have to find it. And we would be like, oh, cold, 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 oh, warmer, warmer, hot, hot, even like an indicator like that helps to shape the learner's behavior in the direction that we want to go. Feedback doesn't have to be super complex. It can be something simple, but it again has to meet those 3 criteria, right? And so being able to take that feedback on and then do the next step and be successful. Really, what we know about learners is that being successful is the best motivation to keep going. And so the more sort of opportunities we can build in for them to find out whether or not they're being successful, the better. Having a long stretch without any feedback, that's where the drudgery comes in. And probably we all remember writing, college papers and things like that, where it's like, oh my God. But, when I wrote my dissertation, for example, my graduate mentor broke that whole thing up into chunks, and I only submitted one chunk at a time and got feedback. It made it much, much easier. I'm going to say not easy, but easier and more enjoyable because I knew at a greater frequency the kind of progress that I was making.
Mm. And whenever you're trying to build that then into a product, this is the tricky bit with the hot and cold analogy. How do you work in areas that are perhaps a little more subjective, very varied in terms of what good looks like? It's not,
Yeah.
there isn't a score of 100 you could hit or a score of 0 when you're hotter or colder. And I guess those are the areas in which, even just in terms of the immediate, not immediate feedback from an external source, but just from the assignment itself, is kind of clear to someone. If you're working in Microsoft Excel or something, you can see as you're going if you're kind of on the right path. But if it's something a little vaguer than that, a little more subjective, how can you build in feedback that is specific enough and also motivating enough to keep someone going when it's not clear what the rules are? The rubric isn't quite as clear. It's maybe something like writing a paper like yours. Well, it takes a real level of expertise, doesn't it, to look at that and immediately think, 2 or 3 things that would make this better. How do you embed that, though, within a technology, even something like AI, which can be quite generic?
Well, so this is something that we hear a lot from the faculty who we work with. So we'll say, what do we want the learner to be able to do? And they'll say something like, oh, well, we want them to understand the strategies involved to making a sale. Okay, well, so all right, now tell me what that means. So how would you know that they understand? What would they need to do? And as we unpack that and figure out what is it, what does it look like, and how do we recognize it? Some of these more subjective things, there may be variations on the way to do something. There may be different paths to get to the same outcome, but we still have to be able to define it in a way that you and I can agree that it happened. And once we get to the point where we can agree that it happened, then we have a framework for evaluating the learner doing it. Whether that framework is applied by a human or by an AI tool, getting to the framework and describing those performances, how do we observe them? How do we measure them? What do they need to be in order for us to consider them successful? What does competence look like for these performances? Now, you may argue, humans are much easier to train to apply a framework like that. And then again, you might argue AI is much easier to train to apply a framework like that. That's really an empirical question. But what I'll say is, the more complex the task and the more variations on the path to achieve the outcome, the more difficult it is to train anyone. But it doesn't mean that it can't be done. It just means that you have to keep drilling down until you understand specifically what it is you're looking for. So I'll give you an example. A colleague of mine was using an AI tool to try to evaluate hypotheses. So the instruction to the learner was, give us a hypothesis about the XYZ thing. And they would write words in the field. And then AI was supposed to evaluate whether or not it's a hypothesis. Okay, well, what do we need to tell the tool about hypotheses? Okay, usually a hypothesis is written as an if-then statement, or written as a question, or. So what do we need to tell the human being? What do we need to tell the AI? Either way, we need to make clear what the criteria are for being correct, and then the degree of correctness, if you will, how close to mastery of the learning outcome has the learner gotten.
And I did forget to say, actually, if anyone has any questions, put those into the little box. I had loads, so I just got to keep working through mine. But yeah, I should say, do pop those into the chat or the Q&A thing.
Yeah, definitely.
My next question, though, while we let everyone stew on that, big question: does it matter who gives the feedback? Does that have an impact on its effectiveness?
Yes. So the research literature is extremely clear that the feedback needs to be delivered by an expert. So this is where we sometimes see problems occurring, where people tend to want to use peer feedback and have peers evaluate each other's work. And that can be really problematic. I have seen many instances where peer feedback is very poor when we ask peers to evaluate the accuracy of each other's work. And the reason for that is probably not surprising. If I'm enrolled in a machine learning course, an intro to machine learning course, and 50 other people are enrolled in it, presumably none of us are experts in machine learning, or we wouldn't be at the intro to machine learning course. And so for us as enrollees in that program to give each other feedback about the accuracy of our work is a little bit like the blind leading the blind. And I've seen many times where faculty have included peer grading in their courses, and then we've had to remove it because it was so inaccurate. And so, it's not surprising. The research is really clear that the feedback needs to be expert feedback. But I think that there's a desire to include more peer interaction oftentimes in online courses, which is absolutely fine. We just need to be careful about how we do it. So I think that we can do things like discussion boards where people are sharing their experiences. They can talk together about their experiences. They can share ideas with each other. But when it comes to the work that's required for the course itself, it's really important that the feedback that I get as a learner is accurate, is helpful to me, because if I'm getting feedback from people who know as little about the subject as I do, that could send me off down a path of well, not good things happening.
And to turn that slightly on its head, is there merit in giving feedback as a learning experience?
So I would say yes. We know that if someone can teach someone something else, that often expands their own repertoire. So one of the interesting things about teaching other people is that sometimes they don't always understand things the first way that you try to teach it to them. And so I may say something to somebody that I think is perfectly clear in terms of the instructions, and then what they do is very different from what I expected. So there's a feedback loop for me, right? Okay, they didn't do what I expected them to do. I need to change something about what I'm doing. And so oftentimes teaching and getting that immediate feedback from the learners that you're trying to teach expands the way that I have to approach the topic. I have to try several different methods of conveying the information or modeling the performance that I expect the person to learn. And so it's absolutely the case that I get stronger as I try to teach others, because they require me to have more variability in what I do, so that I can, pick up these individuals who aren't all going to get it necessarily the first time in the same way. But still, I have to have some expertise in the subject even to do that, right? So if I'm a novice, I am unlikely to be able to come up with multiple ways of approaching the topic that are correct. And so whilst as an expert, I do improve further by teaching, I still have to be an expert to start with in order to really even be able to engage in that.
And following on from that, actually, Erin asks a key question that slipped my mind. Is it important for people to know if the feedback is being provided by AI or a human expert?
Hi, Erin. I know Erin.
Yeah.
Erin and I used to work together. So I don't think we know the answer to that question yet, Erin. I think that utilizing AI in education is still too new to know if there's a difference. But what I can tell you is, and I'm sure Clark can share some stories on this. Clark, I would love for you to jump in. That we know that AI feedback provided by AI, as long as the AI tool has been trained properly, does exactly what we want it to do in terms of impacting the learner behavior. So I think that there are still some probably master's thesis studies out there to be done on the question of whether or not it matters if learners know. But Clark, you want to say a little bit about what you found with your tools about the feedback provided and the impact?
Oh yeah, I mean, we we are finding there's a lot of appetite to use what we've got just as a research and study tool, because it is opening up a lot of these things that we didn't really expect. So everyone's aware, we have at the moment a search marketing simulation, but with a built-in AI tutor that, it's there to answer questions with like customer personas that people can interact with. Those are AI as well. And then we have a bit that will review their ad before it goes live and give them a little bit of feedback. I don't know, when we started, we maybe thought these will be a little bit of a gimmick. Let's see if people use them, but they don't have to be there. Maybe they clutter up the interface. We could lose them if we need to. They, to your question, Erin, I can't imagine that they would trust human feedback any more than they are trusting the AI stuff. I mean, they are taking it as gospel. They really do, and give the AI a human name, and you're away. The amount of emails I get about, oh, Ella was a bit weird yesterday. Like, I think it's not a real person, but it's not a real person. Like, we just gave it a name.
and
Like,
I mean, Aaron, if you were to see some of Clark's data, which at some point, will be out there in the world to consume, all the lines go up, right, in the performance. And so the learners are definitely taking that AI provided feedback on board, and they are modifying their behavior in making all the adjustments to try to sell more belts or sell more trench coats in the search engine marketing simulation. And so it's working brilliantly. And yeah, I do love that part, Clark, about how, Ella is acting a little bit strange because it does, we have somebody on our team who calls his instance of Chat GPT Frank. And so he'll say to me, oh, Frank and I were working on something today, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm kind of at the point where I almost forget that Frank is Chat GPT.
Yeah. I mean, it has absolutely happened to us. And to come back to a point from earlier, actually, about this little Ella thing, we had to change it because it was too nuanced. So we thought, you create your ad and then you say, ask Ella for analysis. It looks at a bit like a rubric. We have loads of good examples, mediocre ones, bad examples, and then it compares the user one to those and comes back, and it'll always give them a tip for improving. And we thought they would maybe look at this once and then move on. But there were some people who were almost paralyzed on this stage. They were just in this feedback loop and they would never move forward. And I would say to them, I use it in classes as well as online. So it's been 90 minutes. Why haven't you moved forward? You haven't posted to the leaderboard. And the eternal quote that came back was, Ella didn't tell me to. Yeah, she's not gonna. She's there to help you. She's always going to find something. It's like, yeah, but I was waiting for her to say, this one's really good. You need to move forward now. So we had to change it so that once certain parameters are met, it will say, you're fine. Like, this is good enough. Just give it a go. Like, move forward. Because a lot of the feedback, of course, comes when they run their simulation and they see the results, and then they get feedback on the data. And that's supposedly the best bit of it. But we found that they use these. I mean, like you say, Karen, they use them to improve their performance. The amazing thing for me, being relatively new to looking at a lot of this stuff, is just seeing. It is quite rewarding just how different those trend lines are. The direction of travel is the same. It's fantastic to see that they're picking this up, and they do all of their self-reflection, and they can explain their strategies, and it's genuinely very, very rewarding to see. But the trend line on average, yeah, is going right up. But some people, it's way up, way down, way up, way down. Some people are very incremental improvers. Some people move along very static, go down, cross, up, and you can just see all of these different lines, obviously netting out at an overall pattern going up. But it gives people the opportunity to seek the feedback as well. So there are some bits in ours where you've got no option, it's right there, it's going to pop up in front of you. But there's also some ways that you can just it's a good idea. Yeah, TJ, I think behavioral dependence as learners, waiting for that confirmation from the expert, would be a smarter way of putting what I just said, which is just Ella didn't tell me to go, so I didn't go. But it's exactly right. It's there if they need it. And what we found is we left it that way. They seem to need it a lot more than we thought they would. We did think the UI is nicely designed. They'll know how to navigate it, but they constantly want this feedback. Maybe that's a sign of how
Mhm.
much they do depend on it, because they're clicking on it all the time. We thought maybe 3-4 times. It's like 30.
So I would suggest that it's not, I would suggest that it's not that they need it. What I would suggest is that the feedback that you're doing well is positively reinforcing.
Mm.
And so, you know, they're seeking out confirmation that they're doing well. And people like to do well in general. And I think we see that too, Clark, if you don't mind my saying, in some of the data that you're generating, where there's no requirement that the learners practice over and over and over and over and over, and yet they continue to practice well beyond even what you expected.
We had someone who played the leather belt simulation in an Emeritus course this week over 100 times. One person.
And what's the requirement?
3.
3. So they have to play it 3 times. They played it 100 times. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like what you say is that it's something like, if you sell 100 belts, that's like an amazing accomplishment in the simulation. And you know, you're seeing these people continue to work toward selling 100 belts when there's no requirement to do so. And so, you know, like, this is the thing that for me as a behavioral scientist is so amazing. This combination that you've built of the feedback for individual responses, but also the feedback where they can see their progress across time. Yeah. Encourages them to keep going and keep going and keep going. Mm-hmm. And all of that time that they're doing that, guess what? Like, they're getting better and better at adjusting the settings for the search engine marketing. How much, you know, what do you want to pay per click? What do you want to pay per lead? You know, all of these different things that they have to adjust. And so what you've essentially done is you've gamified this so that they are enjoying it so much that they're going well beyond the requirement of the tool itself, which I think is fantastic.
Well, a lot of this came from we've been discussing this for years, haven't we, about building that in, looking at solutions that were out there. And that was the
But how often do you see something like come to fruition and then start generating dream data? You know, like, that just doesn't happen that much. But I think it's such
so far.
Once so far. But I think that pattern that we're seeing is really, oops. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay. It just, my headset just turned off on the computer. I think it's just evidence of the power of the feedback and the power of the fact that you have made the feedback immediate, specific, and informative. And so they know what to go back and tweak and try to get closer, try to get closer, 100. And so,
and we've got that balance. You know, it's obviously trial and error. Too close to giving away the answers sometimes, and it demotivates them. The high achievers, it tends to demotivate a little bit, because they kind of feel like, I would have figured that out myself, and that was kind of given to my classmates. So we've had to kind of figure out how to nudge them in the direction without leading the witness a little bit too much. But yeah,
I think that's always the challenge for educators is how much is enough, how much is too much, and this is one of the challenges, I think, in this, that, you know, we may find over time that this is one of the challenges in doing this with AI. With teachers, you know, I think I know we have some former K-12 teachers on the call with us. You know, you sort of get to know the kid, and so you can modulate like how much you give based on what you think they can do. We will not have enough time in most of what we do for the AI tool to learn every individual user at this point, to the point where we could give, you know, smaller amounts of feedback or greater amounts of feedback. But who knows where we're going, because, you know, the AI tools are evolving every day. And it may be that it's not that far off in the future where we can train the tools to give differential feedback based on who the learner is that's receiving it.
Yeah, I think when we look at some of that data that we're getting through our tool at the minute, I mean, that just starts to form a whole historical repository that we can use then to train the AI, where you start noticing patterns in learner styles, and you can modulate that very early on, because you know, oh, this kind of first 5 plays is a leading indicator. They're going to be learner type 17, and then
super exciting, super exciting about where we could go.
Yeah, we're not there yet. I'll say that. I mean, I could pretend we are, but
we're not.
We got a couple
I mean,
of
we're still
iterations
figuring out in our shop, at least. We're working really hard on how to train the tools properly, because we don't really, we don't have that nailed down yet. How much training is required and what kind? And every day it's showing us some shortcoming in the training that we've provided. And so, we're still, we have a little pilot going in one of our courses, and it asks, I think it's the same course where we asked about, what is your hypothesis? And we found that using the tool was optional. And we found that some people went in and they just put entered gibberish in the field. And the tool said, oh, that's an interesting idea. And what we realized afterward was, oh my gosh, we didn't train it. We didn't try to break it when we tested it. And so, these are the really important lessons. You can't just put in things that are approximations of what you think might be good answers. You have to put in rubbish answers and make sure that the tool has an appropriate response for those as well. So we're absolutely on the learning curve with this, but I think for me, it's really encouraging that we have the potential now to deliver immediate feedback in many more learning situations than we have had to date.
And a final little point. I know I said we'd only go on until 1:45, but I was also late to start, so give me a bit of forgiveness there. I blame the webinar thing. So Erin makes a good point, and I think this ties with something that we've seen as a trend in digital marketing. Actually, it says, well, you could potentially have learners take a personality quiz, and then AI incorporates that data into their responses, because we spent 10-15 years in digital marketing just trying to gather all of this data and make assumptions about people, and sometimes they'd be right, sometimes they'd be wrong, but we spent billions of dollars on that kind of thing. And recently there's been a transition towards just asking them, maybe just ask them, what are they interested in? Like, are they in the market for toothpaste or not? So maybe if we just ask them, instead of just bombarding them because, well, we think it's been 7 months since they last had a dentist appointment and blah, blah, blah. It's a waste of time and effort. So I think that actually it works, Aaron. I spoke to a researcher last week who was telling me you should be doing stuff like this with yours, not necessarily because the AI needs it or anything, but it also engages the user more. It makes them feel like they're part of their own personalization. It's not just all assumptions about them in the background. I'm configuring my profile so that the AI treats me in the way that I'd like to be treated. We get into, I think, some, as an actual expert in this field, it's probably a separate webinar, Karen, but you get into some areas there where I've seen some tools where they let the learner say what their learning style is. And some of those learning styles, I believe, are more scientifically rigorous than others. And some may be just trendy things that are on LinkedIn. So if you give them too much control that way, maybe it doesn't work so much. But the idea of a kind of personality, even how do you want to be addressed? How do you like to be helped? Do you want short answers?
What's your preferred name? Things like that.
That's a start. Yeah.
I think that, there's the rub, right? Is like, what do you want to ask that you actually intend to use? Because you don't want to ask learners about things that you have absolutely no intention of taking on board, like learning styles. we're not going to be doing like a kinesthetic version of the tool we're not, that's not going to happen. So you want to make sure that what you ask about is actually relevant to what you plan to do, and then use it. And so I think your point, Erin, is a good one about just asking them some things up front. And it may be that you ask them, how frequently do you want to get feedback, or whatever the case may be. And these are things that you can experiment with to see what is the impact. Because what we know for sure is that we don't have any one size fits all. And so that, I think, is part of what's so nice about the AI, is that we can, the experience is bespoke at scale. And that is something that we in digital learning have been chasing for a long time. Usually we can have bespoke, very customized, very personalized, but only for a small number of people, because we're like running around in the background, like, hanging the drapes and doing all the things to make that happen. Or we can have at scale, which is generic, nothing specific and personalized to the learner. And it is not as impactful a learning experience as we could have. So, this is really what we're talking about here with your tools, Clark, with some of the experiments we're doing, is a bespoke learner experience at scale. If there are things that we can ask the learner up front that will help us make that experience feel even more bespoke, then nothing like it.
On that note, and Sandra, yes, indeed, the recording, as long as I hit the right button, will be shared with everybody on this platform. You never know. With me today, I could get it all wrong. But first of all, I mean, a massive thank you, Karen. Always a pleasure having a chat with you, but
No.
really
Thank you for
enlightening
having
and
me. It's been
insightful.
so fun. Are we already done? We'll have to do another one,
I
Clark.
know. So, yeah, you'll regret that, because we've got a packed schedule of these webinars coming up, and we'll definitely have you back on. Yeah. We, of course, love feedback. So we couldn't have a session like this and then deny that we would take any feedback. So let us know any topics or anything you'd love us to discuss in these sessions. We'll be happy to. But yeah, otherwise, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Have a lovely rest of your Thursday, and we'll follow up with you all soon.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.